Explosions light up the night sky over a tiny Persian Gulf resort island, and within minutes, the world's oil markets are moving. This is Kish Island. A place tourists once knew for beaches and duty-free malls is now a smoking flashpoint and one of the most dangerous confrontations the Middle East has seen in years. And tonight, the question everyone is asking is simple. What did the United States Navy actually hit? And why does it matter to you, thousands of miles away? Let's set the scene. In the early hours, Iranian state broadcaster IRIB reported blasts across the country's southern coast. Bandar Abbas, Keshem, and the Persian Gulf island of Kish were all named by state-run outlets as sites where explosions were heard. Iran's IRNA news agency specifically confirmed that one of the islands hit was Kish, though it was careful to state there was no damage to urban or residential areas. That single line, no damage to urban areas, is doing a lot of work. It's Iran trying to control the narrative before the world sees satellite images. It's a government trying to say this was military, not civilian. But is that the whole story? Because this isn't an isolated night. This is round after round. In a campaign the US has been calling Operation Epic Fury, a sustained military effort that kicked off after Iran moved to close the Strait of Hormuz, and according to reporting, a drone strike hit a commercial vessel known as the Ever Lovely. Since then, Kish has become one of the most frequently struck locations in the entire campaign. Not because it's a random target, because of what sits there. Kish Island lies just off Iran's southern coast, close to the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that a huge share of the planet's oil and gas has to pass through. Whoever controls activity around that strait controls leverage over the global economy. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has long used small, fast, hard-to-track speedboats staged out of islands like Kish to threaten shipping, harass tankers, and project power over those waters. That's the backdrop. That's why, night after night, U.S. warplanes and naval assets keep coming back to this stretch of coastline. So here's the real hook, the one underneath the fireballs and the sirens. This isn't just about Kish. It's about who gets to control one of the most important choke points on Earth, and whether a full-blown regional war is about to swallow the Gulf whole. Reports now describe explosions rippling not just across Kish, but Keshem, Abu Musa, Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, and deep into Khuzestan province. Missiles have been fired from as far as Kermanshah. Blasts have been reported near Jordan's Muwafaq Salti airbase. Iran has struck at Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. This is no longer a single skirmish. It's a widening war. And Kish Island, this small, once quiet outpost near the strait, has become one of its most telling stages. By the time you finish this report, you'll understand exactly what the U.S. Navy is going after on Kish, why the island keeps reappearing, night after night in these strikes, how this all escalated from a closed strait and a drone attack into what analysts are now openly calling one of the widest Middle East conflicts in a generation, and what could come next if diplomacy keeps failing. Stay with me, because the next 90 seconds of history could decide whether the Strait of Hormuz and the global economy tied to it stays open or shuts down entirely. Let's break down exactly what happened, strike by strike. Multiple nights of bombing have hit Kish in waves. Early reporting described a third consecutive night of strikes hitting Iranian. Naval assets across Kish, Keshem, and Abu Musa, 3 islands that, together, effectively bracket the approach to the Strait of Hormuz. Video circulating from the port at Kish showed a large blaze burning at the harbor, consistent with strikes on fuel stores, docked vessels, or naval infrastructure rather than the town itself. Separate reporting, citing CNN, described damage to a power plant on the island, a strike that, if confirmed, would move beyond purely naval targets into infrastructure that keeps the island itself running. Open-source military trackers have gone further, pointing to specific footage appearing to show a strike on an IRGC speedboat near Kish, the exact kind of small, fast attack craft the Guard has used for years to swarm and harass tankers in the strait. That detail matters enormously, because it tells us the goal isn't to flatten a city. It's to strip Iran of the specific tools it would need to actually close or threaten the Strait of Hormuz. So as we move into the next section, keep this question in your mind. If the goal really is just to degrade Iran's naval strike capability near the strait, why has this campaign kept expanding? Night after night, island after island, province after province. To answer that, we have to rewind and look at how we got here. To understand why bombs are falling on Kish Island tonight, you have to go back to the spark that lit this fire. According to multiple reports, the current campaign, referred to by observers as Operation Epic Fury, began after Iran moved to close the Strait of Hormuz and after a drone attack struck a commercial vessel identified as the Ever Lovely. That combination, a choke point. Threatened, a civilian ship attacked, was the trigger that pushed Washington and its allies from posture and warnings into direct, sustained military action. Since February 2026, the United States and Israel have reportedly been targeting Iranian missile, drone, and radar facilities in a rolling campaign designed to strip away Iran's ability to strike back at Gulf shipping and regional bases. Kish Island, given its location right at the mouth of the strait, has been one of the most frequently hit locations in that campaign. Not a one-off, but a recurring objective, precisely because of what keeps getting rebuilt or restaged there. Then came a major escalation. Iran launched ballistic missiles and drones at American forces stationed across the Middle East. In direct response, President Donald Trump vowed the United States would respond forcefully, telling reporters the U.S. was prepared to hit back hard. U.S. Central Command confirmed shortly after that American forces had begun launching strikes against Iran, describing the wave of attacks as a powerful response to Iran's attempted assault on U.S. forces. That operation was described by the Pentagon as a 2-hour effort that struck dozens of IRGC-linked targets, including military command centers and drone facilities, with the strikes framed publicly as retaliation for Iran's attack on U.S. positions, including in Jordan. The human cost has been real on both sides of the reporting. Iranian state media said 3 people were killed in U.S. strikes on Kish Island, and separate reporting described people trapped under rubble after a strike hit a residential building there. A claim that, if accurate, complicates the narrative that these operations are cleanly hitting only military infrastructure. Funerals have already been held for fighters described as members of popular mobilization forces killed in the exchanges, a sign that this conflict is pulling in allied militia networks beyond Iran's own armed forces. Iran, for its part, has not absorbed these strikes passively. It launched missile and drone attacks against Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan, describing them as retaliation for U.S. strikes on Iranian targets. Kuwaiti authorities confirmed their air defense systems, intercepted a ballistic missile, several cruise missiles, and dozens of drones aimed at key facilities and civilian infrastructure, and confirmed that one of their own naval vessels was struck, injuring 4 service members. Bahrain reported fresh Iranian attacks as well. Jordan said its military intercepted several missiles that entered its airspace with explosions in Bahrain and hit launch sites tied to the broader U.S. presence in the region. The map of this war has widened by the week. Blasts have hit Bandar Abbas repeatedly. Bushehr, home to Iran's second naval region, along with factories and an airbase, has been struck multiple times. Explosions have rocked Khuzestan province in Iran's southwest, near the Iraqi border. A missile was reportedly fired from as far inland as Kermanshah, and U.S. strikes have reached remarkably far north, hitting an IRGC naval base in Zibakanar on Iran's Caspian Sea coast, marking the first time in this round of the conflict that a northern IRGC facility, far from the Gulf, was directly targeted. A provincial official confirmed equipment at a base known as the Sayed al-Shohada facility was damaged, while stating that no casualties had been reported at that time. The economic ripple effects have been immediate and severe. As the campaign intensified, ship tracking data showed traffic through the Strait of Hormuz collapsing to its lowest level in months, with only a single vessel, a very large crude carrier bound for China, transiting the strait on one recent day, down from just a handful the day before. Oil prices climbed back, above $100 a barrel as the conflict entered its second week of consecutive nightly strikes. President Trump added a financial dimension to the pressure campaign as well, warning that Iranian funds under U.S. control could be used to compensate victims of attacks on commercial shipping, turning this into not just a military campaign, but a financial one too. And crucially, Trump signaled this might not be the ceiling. Speaking to Israeli media, he said he was considering an operation larger than Epic Fury itself, describing it as a possible massive attack, while stressing no final decision had been made. He added that if the U.S. acted, Israel would be prepared to join within minutes if asked. A statement that, if it plays out, would fold Israel formally into direct military operations against Iran rather than the more indirect roles reported earlier in the year. This is the chain: a closed strait, an attacked tanker, months of rolling strikes on missile and drone sites, an Iranian missile barrage on U.S. bases, a declared powerful response, and now a spreading war touching Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, and the open waters of the Gulf itself. Kish Island sits at the center of that chain, not as collateral, but as a recurring target. So let's now zero in on exactly what the U.S. Navy has been aiming for there, and why. Here's where we get specific. When officials and open source analysts describe strikes on Kish Island, they are not describing indiscriminate bombing of a resort town. The pattern across multiple nights of reporting points toward a fairly consistent target set: naval assets, IRGC-linked military infrastructure, and, in at least one account, island power infrastructure. Start with the naval angle because it's the through line. Reporting has directly stated that boats anchored at Kish Port were targeted, and separate footage reportedly shows a strike on what's described as an IRGC speedboat near the island. These small high-speed craft are central to how Iran's Revolutionary Guard operates in the Gulf. They're cheap, fast, hard to track on radar, compared to larger warships, and they can swarm a tanker or a naval vessel in a way that's difficult to defend against using conventional means. If the U.S. objective is to prevent Iran from being able to threaten or close the Strait of Hormuz, taking out these speedboat assets, wherever they're staged, is one of the most direct ways to do it. Kish, sitting right at the strait's western approach, is a natural staging ground for exactly this kind of small boat activity, which explains why it keeps showing up as a target across separate nights of strikes, rather than being hit once and left alone. Then there's the broader IRGC infrastructure angle. 1. Report specifically describes the U.S. conducting an attack on IRGC sites located on Kish Island, tying it directly to the broader Operation Epic Fury campaign, a campaign explicitly framed as an effort to degrade Iran's maritime threat capability without escalating into a full ground invasion. That's an important distinction. The stated goal, at least as described in this reporting, is not regime change or territorial conquest. It's the methodical removal of Iran's ability to hold the strait, and by extension, a huge share of the world's oil trade, hostage. There's also the power plant detail, which stands somewhat apart from the naval target pattern. A separate report describes a strike damaging a power plant on Kish Island. If accurate, this represents a shift from purely military naval targeting toward broader island infrastructure, the kind of asset that keeps lights on, keeps water pumps and communications running, and keeps the island functioning day to day. Striking infrastructure like this raises the stakes. It moves the conversation from "we hit their boats" to "we're degrading the ability of this location to function as a base at all," which is a heavier, more consequential kind of pressure, and one that's much harder for Iran to spin as a purely military exchange. It's also worth noting what Iranian state media has been careful to say and not say. IRN's confirmation that Kish was struck came paired with the claim that there was no damage to urban or residential areas, a statement clearly designed to reassure the island's population and control the domestic narrative. Compare that to Keshem, just up the coast, where Iranian broadcasters reported casualties and people trapped under rubble after a strike hit a residential building. The contrast matters. Iran's own reporting appears to be distinguishing between islands where damage was contained to military-linked assets, like it claims Kish was, and islands like Keshem, where it's acknowledging civilian harm. Whether that distinction holds up under closer, independent verification remains an open and serious question, but it tells us how Tehran wants this story understood. Put it all together, and the picture of what the U.S. Navy actually targeted on Kish becomes reasonably clear. IRGC naval assets, specifically small fast attack boats staged at the island's port, broader IRGC-linked military sites on the island tied to the wider Epic Fury campaign, and, in at least one account, power infrastructure that supports the island's ability to function as a forward base. This is not scattershot bombing. It's a targeted campaign aimed at the specific tools Iran would need to threaten the Strait of Hormuz, hitting the same node repeatedly because, from a military planning perspective, degrading capability requires returning to where that capability keeps regenerating. But targeting logic and strategic consequence are two different things. Even a surgically precise campaign, repeated night after night across half a dozen provinces and islands, adds up to something much bigger than any single strike. And that's exactly where we need to go next. What this means for the region, for the global economy, and for how much further this could still go. Zoom out, and what you're looking at is no longer a contained skirmish around one island. It's a multi-front regional war that keeps adding new fronts by the week. In the span of this conflict, strikes have hit Kish, Keshem, Abu Musa, Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, Khuzestan province, and a naval base as far north as the Caspian Sea coast. Iran has answered by striking Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. Analysts and traders are already pricing in a heightened chance that Iran retaliates further against Gulf states, according to market commentary, tied directly to the Kish Island strikes. This is a war measured not in single incidents, but in an expanding map. The economic stakes could not be higher. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important choke points in the global energy system, and ship tracking data has already shown commercial traffic through it collapsing to a trickle. A single tanker crossing on some days compared to the steady flow that normally passes through. Oil prices pushing back above $100 a barrel is not an abstract financial headline. It's a direct signal that markets believe this conflict could meaningfully disrupt global energy supply if it continues or worsens. Every additional night of strikes, every new island or province added to the target list adds pressure to that number. Politically, the U.S. position appears to be hardening rather than softening. President Trump's own language, describing a potential operation larger than Epic Fury, calling it a possible massive attack, and noting that Israel would be prepared to join within minutes if requested, suggests the current campaign is being treated as a floor, not a ceiling. That's a critical distinction for anyone trying to understand where this goes next. A campaign designed to quietly degrade Iranian naval capability around Kish and the Strait is one kind of conflict. A campaign that escalates into a jointly coordinated U.S.-Israeli operation, larger in scale than what we've seen so far, is a fundamentally different and far more dangerous one. Meanwhile, the human toll is no longer confined to just military assets. Reported deaths on Keshem, people described as trapped under rubble in a residential strike, funerals held for militia fighters killed in the exchanges, and Kuwaiti sailors injured aboard a struck naval vessel. These details show a conflict that, whatever its stated targeting logic, is already producing civilian and paramilitary casualties on multiple sides. That reality complicates any framing of this as a clean, contained, purely military campaign against naval infrastructure alone. So what did the U.S. Navy actually target on Kish Island really tell us in the end? It tells us this campaign has a clear, identifiable logic. Strip Iran of the small boat and IRGC infrastructure it would need to threaten the Strait of Hormuz. Strike the same locations repeatedly because that capability keeps regenerating. And frame the operation publicly as retaliation and deterrence rather than open-ended war. But it also tells us that logic exists inside a rapidly widening conflict. One that has already pulled in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan, pushed oil prices sharply higher, choked off shipping through one of the world's most vital waterways, and now sits one presidential decision away from a dramatically larger operation. Kish Island, in that sense, is a microcosm of the entire war, a small strip of land near a global choke point, hit night after night not because of what it is, but because of what keeps being rebuilt there and what it sits beside. As long as the Strait of Hormuz remains the prize both sides are fighting to control, expect Kish and islands like it to keep appearing in these reports night after night until either diplomacy intervenes or, as officials have themselves warned, this becomes something far larger than what we've already seen. That's where things stand right now. The Strait is barely moving. The oil markets are watching every blast. And somewhere between a damaged power plant, a hit speedboat, and a president weighing a massive next move, the next chapter of this war is already being written.